$500. I'll give you $500, Leo. Just sit still for 5 minutes. The only response to the absurdly generous offer was a peal of laughter. Leo, a small hurricane in a sailor suit, zipped past his father, running along the polished railing of the first-class deck. "Leo, stop! Listen to me! That's dangerous!" Adrian Keller yelled, his usual composure gone. Clink! The sound of a glass being set down pointedly on a nearby table. Adrian felt his cheeks flush. The man accustomed to commanding an entire corporation was now powerless before a 10-year-old and worse, under the watch of dozens of judgmental eyes. He lunged to grab his son's arm, but Leo deftly dodged him and continued his conquest of the deck. Adrian stood frozen, his hands dropping to his sides in defeat. Just then, a gentle voice came from behind him. "Would you like me to give it a try, sir?" Adrian turned. A young girl in a school uniform, holding a sketchbook, was looking directly at him. Her eyes were clear and calm, a total contrast to the storm he was facing. He was momentarily stunned, unsure what she was offering to try. "Try?" Adrian stammered, still flustered. Without waiting for another question, the girl offered a soft, confident smile. She didn't speak to him, but instead turned her attention to the little hurricane currently wreaking havoc on the deck. Instead of shouting over the wind, she simply took a calm step toward Leo. Adrian held his breath, expecting his son to crash right into her. But he didn't. She didn't block Leo's path. She simply held out her sketchbook, open to a page with a drawing of an old pirate ship battling the giant tentacles of a sea monster. "Captain," her voice rang out, clear and mysterious. "Your compass is pointing the wrong way. The treasure isn't in that direction." Leo, who had just ignored a $500 bribe, stopped dead in his tracks, his expensive sneakers nearly skidding on the wooden deck. He whipped around, his eyes wide as he stared at the strange girl and the drawing in her hands. "What treasure?" Clara smiled, lowering the sketchbook. "A sea expedition," she whispered, as if sharing a national secret. "I have the map to the Kraken's Fang, but it only appears in the twilight. We have to find it before the night swallows the ship." The impossible happened. Leo, the boy who couldn't sit still for more than 30 seconds, was suddenly, miraculously still. Without a word, he quietly followed Clara to her little corner. He sat down beside her, his eyes glued to the sketchbook, completely captivated by the world she had just created. Adrian stood frozen, his mouth agape. The surrounding passengers, who had been scowling, were now silent, staring at the scene in astonishment. From where he stood, Adrian could hear the lyrical cadence of Clara's storytelling. She wasn't just talking, she was painting an entire ocean with her words. "Look, that cloud isn't a cloud, it's the breath of the oldest humpback whale in the ocean. And the sound of the waves against the hull, that's the mermaids knocking, asking if we brought any shimmering seashells to trade for stars." Leo sat mesmerized, letting out an occasional wow of admiration. The storm had passed. The chaos had been replaced by an enchanting quiet. Adrian stared at the young girl in her simple uniform. She hadn't used money or threats. She had used only a pencil, an old notebook, and a phenomenal imagination to tame his unruly son. Nearly an hour later, as the sunset gave way to the first stars in the sky, Leo finally let out a big yawn, his head resting on Clara's shoulder. His eyes were heavy, but he still tried to focus on the page. The sea expedition seemed to have drained all the energy from the little captain. Adrian approached cautiously, his voice now full of sheepishness and sincere gratitude. I really don't know how to thank you. You really saved me back there." He instinctively reached for his wallet again. "Let me pay you for your—" Clara looked up, her eyes sparkling under the soft yellow deck lights. She shook her head gently, a warm smile on her lips. "There's no need, sir. I'm just happy Leo enjoyed the stories." Just then, Leo, in a sleepy haze, reached out and turned to another page in the sketchbook. He pointed, his voice drowsy. You draw stars, too, And buildings. Really tall buildings. Curious, Adrian leaned in to look at the worn sketchbook. He was stunned. What he saw were no longer childish fantasies of sea monsters and pirate ships. Before him were intricate architectural sketches, with lines so impeccably straight and precise they were breathtaking. A building with a dome that mimicked the Pleiades constellation, suspension bridges as delicate as the Milky Way, and detailed notes on light angles, materials, and structural integrity. Flipping to another page, he was even more amazed. There were pages of celestial observations, with planetary orbits carefully drawn and constellations meticulously labeled in both Italian and ancient Greek. This wasn't the work of a teenager doodling for fun. This was the work of a true talent, a mind that was both wonderfully imaginative and rigorously structured. "My God," Adrian breathed, his voice filled with awe. "These aren't ordinary drawings." Clara seemed a bit shy, gently smoothing the frayed edge of the paper. "It's my passion." She paused for a moment before continuing, her tone becoming more formal. "Actually, I'm on my way to Athens to participate in the International Young Architects Competition." Adrian's head snapped up, his eyes wide with admiration. "An international competition?" "Yes," Clara nodded. "The grand prize is a full scholarship to the Florence Academy of Art. It's my dream." She glanced down at the luxurious ship gliding through the night, and her voice grew quiet. "The travel expenses were actually covered by donations from my neighborhood back in Italy. Everyone pitched in a little, just so I could have this chance." Adrian settled Leo, who was now fast asleep, comfortably on a nearby lounge chair and draped a light blanket over him. He returned to Clara with 2 mugs of hot chocolate he had ordered from an attendant. He handed one to her. "Here, drink this. It'll warm you up," he said. His voice completely changed, all the earlier tension gone. He sat across from her, keeping a respectful distance. "Your architectural drawings, they incorporate so many elements of the stars and the sea. That's not just a coincidence, is it?" Clara accepted the mug, the warmth seeping into her palms. "No, sir, it's not," she replied, her gaze fixed on the silver moon hanging over the black expanse of the sea. "To me, the greatest architecture must be in harmony with the universe. It has to know where and when to welcome the sunlight, and it must know how to look at the stars." She pointed to a bright dot in the distance. "That's the North Star. Sailors use it to find their way. If you know how to read the stars, you'll never be lost." She spoke of ocean currents, of how ancient ships navigated coastlines by observing the constellations, all with a depth of knowledge and passion that made it seem as if she'd spent her entire life at sea. Adrian listened, increasingly captivated. "Your knowledge. It goes far beyond what you'd read in a book. You speak like a true mariner." The smile on Clara's lips vanished. She looked down at the hot chocolate in her hands, and the earlier excitement was replaced by a quiet, profound sadness. "My father," she began, her voice softening. "He was a sailor." The word was hung in the night air. Adrian could feel the weight of it. He didn't press, just waited in silence. "He was lost at sea many years ago," Clara continued. Her voice didn't tremble, but Adrian could see the deep-seated pain in her clear eyes. "His ship was caught in a massive storm. They never found anything." A silence fell between them. The sound of the waves lapping against the hull seemed to grow more poignant. "I'm so sorry," Adrian said softly, and his words were entirely sincere. "Your mother, she must be incredibly proud of you." Clara gave a slight shake of her head. A single tear welled in her eye, but she refused to let it fall. "My mother, she isn't well. She's very sick." She looked directly at Adrian, and for a moment, he no longer saw a 16-year-old girl, but a young woman forced to grow up too soon, shouldering burdens no one her age should have to bear. "It's why I have to win this scholarship. To take care of her. Right now, I go to school and work part-time at a local bakery to make ends meet. Adrian was completely floored. He thought of his foolish $500 offer. To him, that sum was just a number to solve an annoyance. To this girl, it could mean her mother's medicine or a month's worth of groceries. Adrian set his empty mug down, his heart heavy with the story he had just heard. He couldn't just let this go. He was an investor. His instinct was to see value and opportunity where others saw none. But this wasn't a business deal. This was far more personal. "Clara," he said, his voice serious, "you can't do all this alone. I want to help. Tuition, living expenses in Florence, your mother's medical bills. Just name a number." He pulled out an expensive fountain pen and his business card. "I can sponsor your entire education. Consider it an investment in your talent." This was how he solved problems. With money and influence, he was certain it was the best, most practical offer she could receive. But Clara shook her head, firmly. "Thank you for your kindness, sir. I truly mean that," she said, and the sincerity in her voice made Adrian understand this wasn't a refusal born of pride. "But that scholarship, I want to earn it myself. It's a promise I made to my mother, and to my father, too." Adrian was surprised. He put the pen away. "Then, what can I do to help? At least let me pay you for tonight. You helped me more than you know." Clara was silent for a long moment, her eyes gazing out at the dark sea as if weighing something of immense importance. Finally, she turned back to face Adrian. "Not money," she said slowly, "but there is something. Something that perhaps only a man like you could help with." "Go on," Adrian said immediately, without a moment's hesitation. "My father. His name was Marco Moretti," Clara said. And it seemed as if saying the name itself took all her courage. "He was a marine engineer. All I know is that the last ship he worked on belonged to a major international shipping company, maybe based in Switzerland or Germany. I've tried to search, but I'm just a kid. No one answers my emails." She took a deep breath. "You're an international investor. You have connections. I'm not asking you to find him. That's probably impossible. I just want to know. What really happened to that ship? An official report, an archive file, any information at all. So my mother and I can finally have some closure." Her plea wasn't for a material gift, but for a sliver of hope, a truth to soothe a wound that had festered for years. Adrian was deeply moved. He looked into the hopeful eyes of the 16-year-old girl shouldering the responsibility of an entire family. He saw in them the reflection of the father she had never stopped searching for, and the extraordinary talent being stifled by the weight of her life. Helping her was no longer a choice. It was something he had to do. He nodded, his voice firm and commanding, the same authority he used in the boardroom. "Done. I promise you, Clara, I'll use every connection I have. I will find out what happened to your father, Marco Moretti. I won't forget that name. It wasn't just a promise. It was a pact. Sealed not with ink, but with empathy and compassion on a ship in the middle of the night sea." The following days on the voyage to Athens turned into a strange, unspoken arrangement. On the surface, they looked like a small family on vacation. Adrian, no longer the irritable parent, now sat leisurely on the deck reading, occasionally looking up to smile at Leo, who was engrossed in learning to draw the constellations from Clara. The boy had been completely won over by his new big sister. But behind that peaceful facade, a secret investigation was proceeding at breakneck speed. Whenever he had a moment alone in his luxury suite, Adrian slipped back into his business persona. Discreet calls were made via satellite phone, and encrypted emails were sent to his most trusted network of private investigators in Europe. Name: Marco Moretti, marine engineer. Italian national. Went missing approximately 10 years ago. He commanded over the phone, his voice crisp and efficient. Combed through the records of all the major shipping corporations in Hamburg, Geneva, and Rotterdam. I want the name of the last vessel he served on and the official accident report." The information trickled in. First came the confirmation of Marco Moretti's name in the files of a massive Geneva-based shipping conglomerate. Then came the ship's name, Poseidon's Gambit. And finally, once their own ship had docked at Piraeus and they were settled in a luxury hotel in Athens, the decisive email arrived. Adrian opened it late at night, long after Leo was asleep. The official report was clear. 10 years ago, the Poseidon's Gambit had encountered a Category 5 hurricane off the coast of the Cyclades Islands. A distress signal was sent, but when rescue teams arrived, they found only the heavily damaged ship, adrift and abandoned. There was no sign of the crew. The report concluded with a single, chilling line that made Adrian hold his breath. The crew members are presumed missing, but were never officially confirmed as deceased. His heart pounded. Never officially confirmed as deceased. Those words didn't offer an ending. They opened a door to a sliver of hope. A hope that was both fragile and potentially agonizing. Meanwhile, Clara's journey ran parallel, though hers was anything but quiet. She spent most of her time perfecting her design for the competition. Her hotel room was littered with sketches and cardboard models. She explained her city on the waves concept to Leo, a coastal community that could generate its own power from the tides, complete with a public observatory looking out over the sea. But Adrian, with his keen eye, noticed that her mind was never fully present. Whenever she finished a complex architectural detail, her hands would pause, and her gaze would unconsciously drift toward the balcony, toward the vast Greek sea. Her burning artistic ambition was always split by a grief that had never faded. The sea, the endless source of her inspiration, was also the very thing that had taken her father from her. Adrian and Leo had become her temporary family, her only audience and support system in this foreign land. It was Clara who taught Adrian how to patiently listen to Leo's rambling stories. In turn, Adrian made sure she had everything she needed to prepare for the competition. But he kept the information he'd found a secret, feeling its immense weight on his shoulders. He knew he was holding a truth that could either give flight to Clara's dreams or shatter them at the last possible moment. The grand hall of the Athens Institute of Architecture fell silent, the only sound being Clara's clear, confident voice. She stood on the stage, caught in the spotlight, beside her intricate model of the city on the waves. Every eye in the room, from the prestigious panel of judges to the audience, was fixed on her. In the audience, Adrian sat bolt upright, with a strangely focused Leo beside him. He felt a swell of pride rise in his chest, as if Clara were his own. She wasn't just presenting with numbers and technical drawings, but with her whole soul. Each building isn't just designed to face the sea for the view, Clara explained, her hand gliding lightly over the model, but also to listen. To listen to the waves, the wind, the call of the ocean. It's about connection, not conquest. At that exact moment, the phone in Adrian's pocket buzzed furiously. He frowned, about to silence it. Nothing could be allowed to break this moment for Clara. But when he glanced at the screen, the name Hoffman, investigator, made him freeze. This was the man he'd hired, the best in the business. A call at this time could only mean one thing: urgent news. Trying not to make a sound, he slipped out of his row, whispering to Leo, "I'll be right back, son. Stay put." He stepped into the deserted hallway, feeling his own heart begin to race. He pressed the phone to his ear. "Hoffman? Mr. Keller." The voice on the other end was crisp and professional. "We have a breakthrough. This isn't a rumor. We've run a preliminary verification." Adrian held his breath. "Go on." "Thessaloniki, the port city to the north. There's an Italian man who's been living in the old harbor district for over a decade, doing odd jobs at the shipyards. The locals call him Marco the Forgotten because he suffers from amnesia after a sea accident he never speaks about." Adrian's head swam. Description: mid-50s. Salt and pepper hair. A small scar above his left eyebrow. The build, the age. It's a perfect match for Marco Moretti's file. Adrian felt himself lean against the cool wall behind him for support. Thessaloniki. Not far from Athens at all. A man with amnesia, never officially confirmed as deceased. All the pieces suddenly slammed together with horrifying speed. He turned to look back into the hall through the glass door. Clara was in the final moments of her presentation, her face glowing with passion. He could hear her voice drift out. And so, the city on the waves is more than just a place to live. It is a place for hope. Her word, hope, struck him right in the heart. He looked down at the phone in his hand, then back at the girl shining on the stage. He was holding a truth with seismic power. He could tell her now, give her the greatest hope of her life, but it would almost certainly shatter the most important moment of her career. Or he could stay silent, let her achieve her dream. But every passing second would be another second he was hiding the truth. Adrian Keller's entire world shrank to this single, fateful choice. Family or career, the past or the future. He had to decide, and he had to decide now. Adrian stood frozen in the hallway, the frantic pounding of his own heart louder than Clara's voice drifting from the hall. He thought of Leo, of his own powerlessness on the ship's deck, of how Clara had taught him that connection mattered more than money. He thought of his promise to her. To keep this secret, even for 10 more minutes, would be a betrayal. Family. It was what she had lost, what she was fighting to protect. It had to come first. He took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and walked swiftly down the side aisle, making no sound. Clara had just finished her main presentation and was preparing for the judges' Q&A. He positioned himself in the wings, where only she could see him clearly. He said nothing, simply looked directly into her eyes, his own gaze conveying all the urgency and meaning of the news he was about to deliver. Clara frowned slightly, sensing that something of immense importance was happening. One of the judges began the first question. "Miss Moretti, your concept of sustainability is quite impressive, but..." Just then, Adrian called her name softly, just loud enough for her to hear. Clara. She turned her head. Their eyes met. He spoke, each word clear and deliberate. "We found him, Clara. We think. We've found your father." Clara's world stopped spinning. The microphone on the lectern nearly slipped from her grasp. The entire hall, the judges, the architectural model, everything blurred. The only thing left was Adrian's voice echoing in her mind. "We've found your father." Tears began to stream down her face, uncontrollable. A strangled sob escaped her throat, amplified by the microphone, stunning the entire hall into silence. She raised a hand to cover her mouth as hot tears traced paths down her cheeks. 10 years of waiting, 10 years of flickering hope, 10 years of unanswered questions. All of it came crashing down in a single, overwhelming moment. But then, in the midst of her emotional storm, she looked down at her model of the city on the waves. The project she had poured her soul into, built from the memory of and love for her seafaring father. She suddenly realized this wasn't the time to fall apart. This was the time to turn all of that emotion into strength. Clara took a deep, shuddering breath and hastily wiped her tears away. She turned back to face the judges, her voice still trembling, but now infused with a fierce conviction it hadn't possessed before. "Forgive me, ladies and gentlemen," she said, and the entire hall held its breath to listen. "You were asking about sustainability. But perhaps the most sustainable foundation for any structure is hope." She was no longer looking at her prepared notes. She was speaking from her heart. This design wasn't just created from numbers and materials. It was born from the afternoons I spent sitting at the harbor, watching the sea and wondering if a ship might one day bring my father home. It was created from the stars my father taught me to read, the same stars that guided him, and that guided this design. Her emotion was no longer a weakness. It had become her greatest source of inspiration. Her speech was no longer a presentation, but a confession, a moving story of loss and faith. Architecture, to me, isn't about building walls. It's about building bridges. Bridges between people, between the past and the future, and sometimes a bridge to help find your way home. When she finished, the hall was silent for a beat, then erupted in thunderous applause. There was little need for deliberation. The head of the judging panel, a distinguished elderly architect, rose to his feet. He removed his glasses, his eyes full of profound respect. "Miss Moretti," he said, "today, we didn't just see an excellent design. We saw the great heart behind it. The grand prize of this year's International Young Architects Competition is awarded to you." Clara burst into tears again, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She had won. She had kept her promise to her mother. And most importantly, she was about to be reunited with the father she thought she had lost forever. It was a dual victory, a fateful moment where professional ambition and a family's longing had finally become one. The car ride from Athens to the port of Thessaloniki was shrouded in a tense silence. Clara sat in the back, her hands clutching the gleaming silver trophy, the prestigious award she had just won. But her mind was no longer there. It was racing ahead, to the harbor, to a man she was both desperate and terrified to see again. Leo sat beside her, sensing her anxiety, and gently placed his small hand on hers, a silent gesture of comfort. Adrian drove, his eyes on the road, but his mind was in the same place as theirs. He had arranged everything, but he knew that the most important part, the most human part, was completely beyond his control. Finally, the car rolled to a stop in the old port district. The salty air of the sea and the faint smell of diesel drifted on the wind. Amidst the weathered fishing boats and time-faded warehouses, a lone man stood with his back to them, looking out at the sea. His hair was as white as the seafoam. His frame was thin and weathered, his back slightly hunched as if carrying the weight of a forgotten decade. Clara stepped out of the car, her legs threatening to give way beneath her. Adrian and Leo followed, keeping their distance. "Are you sure it's him?" Clara whispered, her voice cracking. Adrian simply gave a slow nod. As if sensing their presence, the man slowly turned around. Time and the sea had carved harsh lines onto his face, but when their eyes met, the world seemed to stop. It was those eyes, still the same warm, brown eyes, though now clouded with a haze of confusion and distant sorrow. Clara recognized them instantly. They were the eyes that had looked at her from old photographs, the eyes of the father she had drawn from memory 100 times over. She let the trophy fall from her hands. It landed softly in the dust, unnoticed. The man looked at her, his expression one of utter bewilderment. He didn't remember. His mind was a blank slate. But his heart, perhaps, was not. It was as if an invisible thread, long severed, was trying to reconnect. Clara moved forward, slowly, step by step, as if afraid any sudden movement would shatter the apparition before her. Tears began to fall again, but this time there were no sobs. "Papa," that single word, uttered as a whisper, carried the weight of 10 years of separation. The man froze. The name Clara seemed to surface from some deep ocean within his mind, a sound both foreign and achingly familiar. He didn't understand why, but his heart gave a sudden, painful lurch. Clara was standing before him now. She raised a trembling hand and gently touched the small scar above his eyebrow, the scar she still remembered from her childhood. And then she buried her face in his shoulder, her arms wrapping tightly around this man who was both a stranger and the most familiar person in the world. Her embrace held not just joy, but also the pain, the waiting, and the forgiveness for all the lost years. The man, after a moment of stunned hesitation, slowly wrapped his arms around her too, a paternal instinct he couldn't explain. From a distance, Adrian and Leo silently witnessed the wordless reunion. They weren't intruders. They were the ones who had built the bridge for this to happen. Adrian watched the father and daughter embrace on the windswept pier, and he realized that this was, by far, the most successful deal of his life. The story had come to a close. It ended not just with the victory of a prestigious architecture competition, but with a family reborn from loss and oblivion. It all began with a small act on a ship's deck. A young girl offering a hand to a helpless father. And that simple gesture had launched a fateful voyage, forever changing not just one life, but three.